Guys, the production value for these videos has gone up quite a bit. I actually went out and bought a whiteboard for this one. So it's gonna be a good one for sure. But today I wanted to make kind of a quick video talking about broadheads. It's a really contentious topic, or it's a really just debated, talked about topic. And I feel like when you're just getting into bow hunting, you can kind of get lost in the sauce with it, as far as not knowing what to shoot, not knowing what broadhead is good, not knowing if an expandable broadhead is the worst thing to ever happen in bow hunting and a curse, or if it's just like this glorious, awesome broadhead that you should absolutely shoot no matter what, no questions asked. So I wanted to kind of make a video finding some middle ground in that, kind of going through on the nitty gritty, and also talking about how I gauge broadheads. This is kind of something I haven't seen anybody else do this or anybody else break it down like this. So hopefully it helps you kind of figure out how you should be looking at broadheads and just having a better understanding of it. Now, pretty much everything except my way that I gauge broadheads, if I'm looking at them, just some quick math, it's not ideas that I came up with. I'm not claiming to have any of this knowledge that, you know, this video is me putting out this newfound knowledge. It's all stuff that I've read about or found or watched videos on, and I just wanted to kind of simplify it, streamline it, and get it out to you guys. So I'm not claiming to be some sort of expert, because I'm definitely not, but I just hope this video is informative. So I guess setting a baseline would be going over the types of broadheads that I'll be looking at today, and I guess the types of broadheads that are like most commonly used. So starting off, I think with the most commonly used type of broadhead is gonna be the fixed blade category. Now, I'm not gonna go into the number of blades for fixed blades or expandables or anything like that, just the two main ones, fixed blade and expandable broadheads. But this fixed blade is a G5 Montech. It's a 3-blade, 100 grain broadhead. It's cut on contact, meaning that there's no sort of chisel point or anything like that at the tip of it. You hit whatever animal you're aiming at and it starts to cut. I have shot these broadheads for a couple years now. I really love them. A thing with fixed blade broadheads that you talk about quite a bit is gonna be broadhead tuning. That is a lot more important on fixed blade broadheads, because if you think about it, if you're shooting a field point out of your bow, right? This up here is not steering it at all. If you had a field point where this broadhead is, the only thing that's steering it is gonna be the fletchings on the back of the arrow. When you introduce blades, especially non-vented blades like this, just the ones that are just all one piece, when you introduce that, you're effectively adding on 3 more fletchings at the front of your arrow. And those are gonna steer your arrow a lot more drastic than a field point would. So it's important to have a well-tuned arrow, because if I'm shooting an arrow out of my bow and it comes out a little cockeyed like that, instead of having the fletchings in the back correct it and make it go straight again, if I shoot that arrow that's a little cockeyed, it's just gonna keep going off in that direction. So tuning your arrows is very important when shooting fixed blades. It should be important when shooting any type of arrow, but especially in fixed blade broadheads. The second category that I'll be talking about today, and really the second category that there is for broadheads, is going to be expandable broadheads, or mechanicals or anything like that. They're called a lot of different things, but I'd say that this is the kind of up and coming, the more popular one that bow hunters have been getting into. Now, right off the bat, as you can see here with this Schwacker 207 broadhead, it's a lot bigger cutting diameter. It's a 2-blade, but it has a 2-inch cutting diameter. So that is really the main draw, is that you're able to store a lot more cutting into an expandable, because when it's all stored up like this, it looks like a field point relatively. It's not gonna be some crazy super wide broadhead that's gonna catch tons of wind and fly all over the place. You just have these little tiny tails coming out of this broadhead here. And then when they hit, there's typically either like a collar system or a rubber band system or an O-ring or something that opens up those blades, and then it starts to cut. So there's a couple different types of expandables. You can have them from any number of blades, from a 4-blade to a 2-blade, but it's just something that fixed blade and expandables are really the 2 types. So now that we got kind of the types of broadheads out of the way, you've noticed me talking about cutting diameter, and how that is kind of like the measurement that broadhead companies use now to gauge how much their broadheads are going to cut. And obviously, like the bigger number for cutting diameter, the more effective the broadhead you would think it is. And obviously, companies will market that and say that we have a 2-inch cutting diameter. And people who don't necessarily think about it or don't necessarily know a whole lot about broadheads will see that, and that's bigger than a 1 1/4 cutting diameter. And then let's think, all right, that's a way better broadhead. I'm gonna shoot that one. It cuts more, and it's gonna be more effective, and it's gonna be more deadly. And it's kind of true, and it's kind of not. And this is where how I gauge broadheads, or how I think about a broadhead's cutting ability, comes into play for me if I'm trying to choose a broadhead. And I'll show you on the whiteboard here kind of what I mean. Now, like we were just talking about, one thing that broadhead companies will always measure out, and they always use to kind of gauge their broadheads, is going to be cutting diameter. Now, bear with me because I did not do super well in math in high school, but diameter on a circle is going to be the distance from one end of that circle across the middle all the way to the other. So let's say that that right there is a 2-inch cutting diameter, just a 2-inch diameter. That's good, and that's obviously a pretty consistent way to measure the cutting diameter of a broadhead if it is something like this Schwacker 207 where it's only 2 blades. Now, the reason that I don't necessarily follow or don't necessarily pay attention to this measurement a whole lot is because it's really easy to get misleaded by it. So let's say for some reason a broadhead company came out and they made a 1-blade broadhead, and that 1-blade broadhead went out in one direction, and it was a fixed blade or a mechanical or anything like that, and it went straight out. So that right there in math terms would be a radius. That's a single line going from the middle of the circle out to the edge. Let's say the broadhead company made that, and that single blade was 1.5 inches. So that would mean, technically, by the way that broadhead companies measure broadheads, that this whole cutting diameter would be 3 inches, because if you doubled that radius and took it from the middle out to the other side and got a diameter, that would still be a 3-inch cutting diameter. So that right there is where it kind of gets flawed for me, especially when you start to introduce 3-blade broadheads, 4-blade broadheads, anything like that. Is the diameter doesn't always tell the truth. Now, a great example is going to be something like a 3-blade fixed blade broadhead, like this G5 right here. So this G5 on cutting diameter has a 1 1/8 cutting diameter. So if we take that just into decimals, 1/8 is pretty much 1.13. I think it's 1.26, but I'm just gonna say 1.13 for simplicity's sakes. So with a 1.13-inch cutting diameter, that would mean that the radius of that circle, if you had a 1.13 diameter, that is going to mean that the radius right here is going to be roughly a 0.57 radius. Now, obviously, it's not just a 1-blade broadhead. You still have 2 other blades that are coming out from that broadhead. So all of these are 0.57, 0.57. So adding all of that up, you are going to get in total a 1.71 cutting surface. So all of these blades extend out, and they're going to be cutting through 1.71 inches of meat. That right there does not sound as bad compared to a 2-blade expandable broadhead as 1.13 does. So this is always how I gauge broadheads. I measure how much that actual blade is going to be cutting, and then I multiply it by the number of blades. So for example, the Schwager broadhead, a 2-blade, 2-inch cut broadhead. And that means you're gonna have a 2-inch diameter and a radius is going to be 1 inch. Now this really isn't that hard because it's a straight line through. You have 2 radiuses that make a diameter, and you're going to have a 2-inch cut because it's 1 times 2. So a 2-inch cutting area. So you're cutting through 2 inches of meat with all the blades in total. Now, with kind of that baseline being showed, let me go through and explain to you how I would measure out the cutting surface or the cutting area, whatever the proper word for it. How much, I guess I'll say how much meat this broadhead's gonna be cutting through with something like this expandable 3-blade right here. This is kind of a cheapo. It's I think it's called a Laser Strike 2. It's from Bass Pro Shops. I just kind of got it just to test it out. I was gonna maybe try to shoot a doe with it or something like that. But this right here is a 1 1/4 cutting diameter. So you're gonna take a circle here. It's a horrible circle. You have a 1.25 cutting diameter. And I'll show you how I do it on my phone here. So we're gonna take 1.25 divided by 2, because that way you're taking the diameter and turning it into a radius, equals 0.625. Now it's a 3-blade broadhead, so we're gonna go ahead and multiply that radius by 3. So 0.625 times 3 comes out to 1.87. So that right there, in all honesty, if you're looking at a 1 1/4 inch cut compared to a 2-inch cut, you might think that a 2-inch broadhead is gonna have a substantially larger cut, but it really doesn't as far as how much meat you're cutting into. It's almost negligible in all honesty. Now, with that kind of cleared up on how I measure my broadheads, I guess I want to talk about why certain broadheads are good for some and certain broadheads are good for others. And I want to start this off with saying that there's really no right answer. You are really going to be able to shoot different broadheads for different game. And even fixed blades like this. So a probably 1 1/2 inch cut would be the largest I would go on a fixed blade, mainly because of that steering issue that we talked about. Unless you want to throw some insanely large vanes on the back of your arrow and have some really, really struggling tuning methods, you don't want to shoot a super big fixed blade broadhead. So about as big as this broadhead, the G5 Montech, is how big I would go as far as just like the actual profile of that broadhead. But what broadhead you, I guess, should shoot depends on you. Because if you have a guy who has a 31-inch draw length and is shooting 75 pounds, he can shoot anything he wants to. Or she, if you have a 31-inch draw length as a girl and you're shooting 75 pounds, you can really shoot whatever you want to. You can shoot an expandable and an elk, and it's gonna do just as much damage as a fixed blade. And that is a tough pill to swallow for some people, but it's true. I used to get insecure about it because I got a tiny draw length, so I used to say that fixed blades were the way to go, and dudes shooting expandables with a 32-inch draw length were dumb, but in all reality, they're doing more damage than I am. With that being said though, if you look at a fixed blade broadhead, so as soon as you start hitting that animal, as soon as the tip of this broadhead hits what you're aiming at, it starts to cut. You don't have a transfer of energy. You don't have to worry about blades opening up. You are basically just going straight into that animal and starting to do damage. On a mechanical, however, or an expandable, or whatever you want to call it, I need to make my mind up, you have to go through about 1 inch of actual broadhead before you start hitting these little blades right here that open up the real cutting blades themselves and start to cut into the meat. So you have to have a pretty big transfer of energy from the tip itself into the animal, into the blades, and then pulling the blades open. Now, the reason why that's important is because somebody like my girlfriend, for example, she shoots a 25-inch draw length at 40 pounds. It's probably not the best idea for her to shoot a Schwacker or a expandable or a Grim Reaper or anything like that, any of those really popular expandable broadheads, because she already doesn't have a whole lot of energy in her arrows to start off with, and she's only going to lose energy. She's not going to gain any. So I want her arrow to be able to save as much energy as it can, blowing through the rib cage or blowing through the hide or blowing through whatever it has to get through to get to the lungs and the heart and the vitals and the thing that's actually going to kill that animal. Wasting energy on opening up blades and opening up the mechanisms that get the blades to deploy, whether it be a rubber band or a collar system or a O-ring or something like that, it's really not that worth it. Especially when the cutting diameter, you aren't really making up for it a ton. Like, it's not a huge difference. It's not necessarily worth it to me to shoot an expandable at lower energy levels, just because chances are it's not going to penetrate as much. So I guess that for me is why I think that a fixed blade is generally the way to go for anybody under, I hate to put a number on it, but under 45 pounds. Depending on your draw length, I'd say a 45-pound draw is gonna be the lowest I would go with most expandables. Now, getting into 50 pounds, there are some expandables that I really might not even shoot at with that weight. But if you have a 50-pound draw and you're up above like 27 inches, most likely if you're hunting whitetails or mule deer, which is what I have all of my experience with, I would say that's good. Now, granted, that's just me. We've already been over about how I'm not an expert, and I'm probably wrong, in all honesty. I'm sure somebody's gonna tell me that I am. But it's definitely just something to look into, something to consider. If you're all the way up to a 27-inch draw length and you're shooting 70 pounds and you have a 450, 500 grain arrow and you're shooting a whitetail, yeah, you can shoot an expandable. You aren't gonna lose hair, or you shouldn't lose hair at night about whether or not that arrow is going to penetrate or whether or not your broadhead's gonna work or anything like that. It's very rare to have any sort of malfunctions if you have a quality broadhead. Now, with all this, I obviously don't want to be talking bad about any broadhead. My Schwacker, I shot my buck with it just last week. You guys can't see the video of that yet. That's coming out though, and it did a lot of damage. It's a very effective broadhead. So obviously nothing bad about any of these broadheads. They're all great options. And like I always say in all of my videos, it comes down to the shooter. You could have the best arrow in the world. You could have a flippin' lightsaber on the end of this arrow and shoot a deer back in the stomach with it, and it will not do damage to it. Or you might gut shot it and it might go septic, but it's not gonna be a pretty scene. So really, if you're shooting a broadhead clean of the shoulders and you're shooting smart and you have a well-built arrow and a well-tuned arrow, generally speaking, you're gonna be good. I would much rather people focus on the actual hunting side of it and the actual shooting aspect rather than pulling their hairs out before they even can hit a target at 40 yards, 50 yards accurately and consistently. It's definitely something that should take priority over broadheads. Now, with that being said, all this talk about energy and weight of the arrow and draw weight and everything is getting dangerously close to the whole FOC talk of things and the forward to center debate. And I don't want to anger that cult on either side. So I am gonna kind of keep to myself on that for now. That's really all I wanted to talk about in the video. I didn't really have like a script or a schedule on this one. I just wanted to kind of blather out some information and get a video out for you guys. So I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have anything as far as like arrow setups or questions on bows or arrows or anything like that that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. Hunting season is finally here. started off very well for me. So definitely looking forward to those videos getting out. But a couple more weeks here, I'll be out in western Nebraska going after some mule deer. So I'm really looking forward to filming that. Hoping to get this video out and then maybe one more out before that. But in the meantime, you guys have a great one. Have a great hunting season, and I'll see you in the next one.